welcome to this Automation Academy Mastering the Machine webinar for December 31st, 2021, the last day of the year. The topic today mostly ended up being Internet of Things topics with Phil Scruggs and Jeff Chandler, but I also gave a little bit of a look at the Automation Academy and talked a little bit about kind of what it did last year and where it's headed. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks. Good morning and Happy New Year. This is a Mastering the Machine video for the 31st of December 2021, last day of the year. And I don't expect a lot of people to show up for this. It is New Year's Eve morning and people are probably sleeping in and doing all their New Year's festivities. In any case, this is a Mastering the Machine webinar, and I do these every 2 weeks as part of the Automation Academy. And today I'm going to be going over some of the content of the Automation Academy, and of course posting this on YouTube as I normally do, and using this opportunity to talk about the previous year and what went well and what didn't, and also covering some of the plans for the new year. As with a lot of people, my methods of doing things changed a lot after the pandemic. And so part of what I've done is started the Automation Academy, which is a place to keep a lot of my content more than anything else. But what is Mastering the Machine itself? In 2013, I put out a document that was meant to be a lead magnet. It's called Mastering the Machine. And what it was at the time, I had just left Wright Industries, and it was a document explaining how machines are built, custom machinery, and how all that stuff works. And I see Phil's joined. That's cool. So it has evolved into a training and automation website, and I'll be covering some of that today, talking about what that website contains, showing a few pictures of the content and things. And part of what I do is these webinars, and these webinars, I just named them Mastering the Machine, and I've had different guests on over the past year. And also put training videos, PLC videos, things like that on the website, and created a library of documents that I update pretty regularly, and created a community with interest groups on the site. Not a lot of people use that. At times, if I create topics and things, sometimes people will chime in and things like that. And of course, I created these webinars that I do and have guests on different topics. And I've had different amounts of people come in, probably as many as 16 people at one time, and as few as 1 or 2 or 0, right? Sometimes I do these and nobody shows up. This is a picture actually from the previous webinar, just kind of showing some of the stuff that I'm working on at NTH. I'm creating a troubleshooting course, and part of that troubleshooting course involves a book that I've been working on actually for over a year. And the very final exercise is going to involve this machine. And the reason is that Automation NTH builds a lot of machines for a company called Dexcom that does pharmaceutical, life sciences production of, you may have seen like the G7 insulin detectors that you actually connect to your body, and it monitors your insulin and feeds back, whether you need more insulin, things like that for diabetics, and also will inject insulin into you, I guess, and help maintain your glucose levels and things like that. But they build it on this thing called a flex base. And so what you see here is a flex base, and it even says flex base right up here. You can kind of see the little icon. And they put things like robots on them, and then they stack these flex bases together, and they'll make them modular. And so you may have a line that consists of 20 of these, right, all connected together. And inside of these flex bases, there will be things like pallet pallet indexers that will send pallets from one location to another, and then robots on those bases that work on the pallets. And so this is kind of a picture of it. But one of the reasons that I'm able to use this is this doesn't have any proprietary technology or anything on it, unlike the flex bases that, have all the processing equipment for Dexcom on it. So this is one that they bring to trade shows, and they dispense candy with it. It's pretty neat. And I just have a couple pictures here, but this thing down on the end here is an elevator, and it brings pallets up and circulates the pallets through. And you can see little pallets here, and dispenses candy. In the back of it, they have something cool. It's just a black box. And I think the black box is actually just where it dispenses the candy onto the pallets. But it's pretty successful at trade shows because the robot moves around, and the elevators move up and down and things like that. So what I'm doing is I'm using this control panel and the electrical diagrams for it to troubleshoot this machine and kind of show, this input doesn't work. How do I trace that problem through the electrical schematics, and then relate the electrical schematics to the physical components, and then relate the control components to the physical things up here. So I'm going to be creating a video troubleshooting course for this also, and I'll be posting some of the things in the Automation Academy site. So at this point, I'm going to show everybody a little bit of what the Automation Academy itself, what that site looks like. So when people log in, they get to a dashboard like this. And this dashboard, honestly, is a little bit boring. So there's no pictures on the top of it right here. But one of the reasons is that I replace the content of this pretty regularly. I try to update, at least every week or so. And of course, this last week I've been on, I would call it vacation, hanging out with my family, as a lot of people do over Christmas. So the last time I updated this page was just before Christmas, and just talked about what I'm up to and trying to engage, some feedback from people that may visit the site, and, hey, what are you up to? What are you interested in learning? So where do I get some of the ideas for this, right? So I started this, I actually started working on it in August of 2020, and it went live in November of 2020. So it's been a little bit over a year that I've had this up, and it's more or less had the same layout since I originally started it. I do have, little icons and things like that down here. This used to be kind of up at the top, but then I didn't have a place to post current messages and things. So I am willing to change just about anything about this. But where do I get this idea from? This is something that's kind of cool called the Membership Academy. And the Membership Academy is a website. It's also a membership site, and it's a good example of how to do a membership site. So here's what their dashboard looks like. See if it updates here. There we go. And see, you can see kind of the same thing I have. Hey, whatever your name is, welcome back to the Academy. So mine's called the Automation Academy. Theirs is called the Membership Academy. I tried to keep mine, nice generic name. That's why I kind of named it the Automation Academy. It turns out there are other things named the Automation Academy, but the only one that was trademarked is actually like a business automation site. And so mine doesn't conflict with it. I also happen to have the same name as B&R Automation's Academy, which is Automation Academy for B&R Automation. But once again, they don't have a trademark either. So I'm able to use this. But this is kind of neat. They have their dashboard like this. They have a roadmap, which is more or less this thing. And as you go through their exercises and educational things, you get sometimes little badges and things like that. That's what's called gamification. Once again, they have a library resources. I think mine's called education rather than resources. So what I did on mine is I split it. The dashboard is like where you first land. It's called a landing page. On my education page, this is pretty much all videos. right? So the first thing I explain is how to use the videos themselves. I think this is maybe a 5-minute video that shows you how to progress through the videos and take notes and things like that. How I superimpose little icons sometimes over the pages and things like that, pointing out some of the features. And then you can go to the webinars, which we do every 2 weeks. You can go to application requests. So this is where sometimes people want to know how to do something. And I go back and we'll see what this all has in it. Go back and revisit maybe some of my previous jobs. This doesn't have a ton in it because I think I have to create videos for a lot of these. But this was one person actually requested that I do this. How do I write code to cross a conveyor line and make it a safe application and things like that? So I wrote something up, made it downloadable. So a little note on downloadable files on this site. All this stuff is hosted on something called AWS, which is Amazon Web Services. What that allows you to do when you host things like this is put it in a place where people don't just distribute the links all over the world, right? And then that defeats the purpose of a membership site where people just have the links. There are hundreds of links actually on this site. Let's see, go back here. Show how this works. This is the library. And so what these links do is they open. So if I open this, for instance, it opens, right, the document on this site only. You can't just take this link here and open it from another site. So what that does is it kind of protects the content, right? So there's a lot in here. This is a 27-page document. It's kind of cool. I update this pretty regularly. It is a list of descriptions of things, right, related to automation. So there's some simple things, you know, what is a CT, a current transformer, right? And then people can go look up some of those things themselves on Wikipedia or whatever. They can get a quick definition here, database management system. Some of these things are linked directly to the content of other things. So if I go through here and I start talking about what an IDE is, and I use another definition inside of it, you can then take that definition and look that up in here. And the reason that I did this, this particular document, and this is ever evolving, right? I've posted this in some other places, is because a lot of definitions come up and I don't know what they mean myself, right? So if it talks about, let's see if I can find a good one. What is an MES, right? People say, oh, well, we use our MES for this. Well, what is one, right? You can look it up. What is a manufacturing execution system? What is MQTT? I notice Phil's on here. He definitely has been dealing with MQTT. This goes into some detail about it. And honestly, I get a lot of this stuff from either Wikipedia, and I put my sources here, or I find a cool article somewhere else. I found this one on Opto 22, right? Opto 22 has some really good resources on their site. What is a namespace? And then I mentioned unified namespace without putting the actual definition for unified namespace here. It's not necessarily a common term that everybody uses. So this is just an example of one of the documents anyway on here. And one of the, I thought that you couldn't open this in another tab, but it turns out you can. So see, I can go back and I can open this in a separate tab. I was told at first that you couldn't do that, or it made it linkable to other places. So lots of documents in here. That's what these are. Lots of Allen Bradley stuff, lots of Siemens stuff, lots of things on devices. There is some software on here too that's kind of cool. Let's see. Tests, psychometric practice tests. Yeah, software. Let me see if I can find some of that. Here we go. Allen Bradley zip file, right? So this is Motion Analyzer, which honestly, you can get a lot of these online free, but they're really hard to find. in particular, RS Logix 500 Emulate and RS Links Lite. These are becoming very, very difficult to find. Allen Bradley's burying them or obsoleting them. MicroLogix 500 Lite. This actually, if you install this, that lets you have a free copy of 500 software that works with the 1100 and I believe the 1000, the MicroLogix 1000. And this used to be in a pretty obvious place, but now it's really hard to find it. So I decided to put it on here and allow people to download it. Something else that I put on here fairly recently was robotic software. See if I can find that here. Yeah, so this is the Epson software, and it's actually a really big download. So if you go here, I think it's something like 5 gig. And once again, I think maybe you can download this from their site, but the problem with some of these things like these sites is you have to give them a bunch of your information, and then they constantly pelt you with requests for things or whatever, you know, you get on their list. So I just took this and posted it on here. There's some stuff on sensors, ebook from Automation Direct, machine vision. I think I'm going to put this one actually is part of my new book. So this is a pretty good document. It covers a lot of how machine vision works, right? That kind of stuff. So there's a lot of other documents like this. And I plan on putting quite a bit of my new book in here also. And that's just going to be hopefully one of the features that people get when they sign up for the site. The site itself, there are 2 levels of membership. There's kind of a $29 a month membership and a $9.99 a month membership. And the biggest difference is the $29.99 gets you all the videos, right? So let me see. So one of the byproducts of this, because of the way I put it on AWS, you have to hit the back button. That's how you get back to where you were. Here's all the videos, education, courses, right? Go to courses. So the site still works pretty well. I update it fairly regularly. Some of these things that were premium, these were part of the original, how the $29.99 thing was going to work. So over this next year, what do I plan on doing with this site? Well, I want to keep adding to it. I don't know that this is something that is going to grow organically like I originally thought it was. I hope it does, but I don't honestly have the bandwidth to advertise this thing every day. And what I've seen is like these folks advertise literally daily. They're on all kinds of different forums, interacting with people day by day, right? And so all the successful sites I've seen that are membership sites, that's what people are doing. And I don't have a marketing arm. I don't have somebody helping me with the marketing. So it's going to grow fairly slowly. But over the next year, I hope to add content to it and keep doing these webinars and maybe some other events and bringing people into it that way. The model itself is pretty good. These folks, I think they opened up some of their revenue aspects of their site, and they said they do £2 million a year as of last year, right? And £2 million a year is about $3 million a year, and that's for 2 people. They are a husband and wife team, and they do this full time. They have a lot of members. They charge about $500 a year for it. So it's a little more expensive than what I'm charging. I think I do $300 a year. The good thing about what I've been doing here is it does pay for itself. I do have enough paying members that it pays for all the plugins and things that you have to have on a site to do. So it's successful from that standpoint. And I do get to interact with people that are members, such as Phil here, who's hanging out. Let's see if anybody else is lurking. Yeah, we got another lurker there too. Other than that, Phil, I notice you're on here. You got anything you want to say? You've been a member now since the beginning. Anything?
Well, hey, Frank and everyone. Yeah, it's been good being a member of the site from the beginning. I've been able to kind of view it and see it as it changes and evolves over time. And it's exciting to kind of see some of the changes. There's a lot of software on there that can be useful if you find an old PLC that's laying around or you come across one. Um, I've been mostly working with microcontrollers and some newer stuff. So while that isn't necessarily as useful for me, sometimes simulating it or some of the older ones can be useful for kind of making do I add a sensor to an existing system or do I create a whole new box with sensors in it? And sometimes it can be helpful to kind of see what the older systems are capable of. Um, but yeah, it's exciting to kind of engage and see people coming to the site. I agree. There hasn't been as much marketing, but in some ways that's a good thing. Just from all the incessant marketing messages that some of the other sites send out. So
Yeah.
it's a little less spammy, and that can be nice.
So one of the things you mentioned about things like Raspberry Pi, things like that, we're using microcontrollers. And so what I tend to do is migrate the topics based on the interest, right? So we went through a period. Mike O'Day is one of the people who I appreciate this. He joined for a year, and he was involved in a big Raspberry Pi project that I was also involved with. And so you can see back here, let's see, we started talking about Raspberry Pis and things like that. So lots of technical input. And you know what? I don't see a lot on the topic itself. So I may need to look into putting a little more information on what the topic was. So for instance, this one just says mastering the machine webinar was good, little after party conversation, but it doesn't say anywhere up here what the topic of the webinar was. And in this case, it was on Raspberry Pi and Pi plates and things like that. So that's one of the things that I need to go back in here and update is some of these topics. I just mentioned mastering the machine. And sometimes in here, you can say, well, I covered the 3 methods of publishing, Phoenix Contact, projects of things, right? He's a Internet of Things guy. But sometimes, there we go, Pi plates and Node-RED. But then it, like this one, you know, that's my fault. I fall down, right, not describing what the stuff is in the webinar. But I do post all the webinars here on the site, as well as, of course, on YouTube. So people pick those up. Those are a little bit of advertising as such. And you can go into the archives and look at all the old stuff. This before was a lot harder to navigate. I used to just stack the pages on top of each other, and it was really hard to find things. But my daughter, actually, who owns a branding company, went and changed this into basically a blog format, which allows it to be archived and be able to find things. So we've been doing these. You can see for actually archives, you got to go back quite a ways, right, to find stuff. November 2020, I bet Phil Scruggs is there. Phil Scruggs, see, the day after launch. So Phil was right there from the very beginning. Yeah, and once again, really... I hope to keep working on this. But one of the things that's happened to me lately is I've gotten involved with Automation NTH, and 2 weeks now a month, it's like being part-time somewhere, are totally dedicated to their products or projects. So I can't work on my own stuff as much. You were going to say something, Phil?
Yeah, so kind of the pattern that I've seen is a lot of successful, if you could call them successful, kind of automation websites or educational platforms or membership academy style sites. A lot of times it's just putting in the work up front, and several years later, something catches. Some type of digital technology has changed, or some type of strategy at various companies has changed, and all of a sudden there's a whole new market of people trying to go after the information on the site. And so, well, it's amazing that there's been a year. sometimes it takes 2 or 3 years for something to catch. And sometimes it's just about having the right material at the right time. And it could be, high quality content 2 months early. Something might happen in 2022 that just drives people to the site like crazy. And so it's incredible that there's a full year of archived blog posts and information. But sometimes it might take 2 or 3 years, and then it just kind of catches.
Yeah, Mike,
So
I think he mentioned that. He said 5 or 6 years he even put into it. And I was like, actually my blog I've kept up now for 10 years, and I still get a lot of requests for guest posts and things like that. I don't update my own blog often enough. If you add the blog to this responsibility, which this responsibility is, I have to, at the very least, right? Even if I didn't add content during a specific week, I do update this. What's new with me? What am I working on? That sort of thing. If I come into something really new, like this stuff, and as I create new content for this, or as I update my book, which, by the way, so I'm going to show you kind of where I'm at on the book. Right now, it is 281 pages long. I hope to make it, my PLC book is about 340 pages long, and I hope to kind of make this a companion book for the PLC book. It's got a whole lot of good general topics of what things are. It's meant for troubleshooting and maintenance, but what I've been putting in it is a lot of kind of system-oriented stuff so that people can kind of see how things are connected together. And then I've got things like basic electricity even in here, or robotics. What are these different kinds of robots? And then I have tests and things like that, because Dexcom wants tests, right? So that's why I put exercises like this in here so that people can gauge things. There's another look at the machine vision thing that I did, but this one has a lot more information in it. So there's some cool things at the end of the book. For instance, I have, the answers to all the quizzes. That's a important one. And some tables, right? ASCII tables, field of view chart for machine vision. And then I refer people back to that, and they can go to the field of view chart and size, lenses and things like that. How to read resistor color codes, or ampacity for motors, things like that, which some of these are things that I put in my first book, Industrial Automation Hands-On. There's an exercise on scaling, right? Some of this can be a little dry, right? People just read this stuff, and it's just lots and lots of reading, and that gets, I know, a little monotonous for people to just try to read things, but I'm hoping that it can be a good general resource for people. My books actually provide a decent amount of income for me every year. So if I add those together with these websites and things, I'm hopefully able to, work, probably do my hands-on stuff, 2 weeks a year, and 2 weeks a month, instead of doing it for the full month. Because sometimes you're doing that and then you have no time to create any content. So there's quite a balancing act there. But anyway, that's a little look at that. So that's, what worked in the last year. Updating this and keeping up with the website, I think did work. I was able to engage with some people. Some people have joined the Automation Academy. Honestly, they don't log in that often. I can actually see when people log in, and people, a lot of times they'll join and they'll download some things, and then they just stay members and maybe help support my efforts, but don't necessarily log in to engage with all the content. Part of that would be maybe they want to see new things. They want to see new videos and things. And I don't know that they've checked out all the old videos, but it's hard to keep up with content like that. Let's see what else we got in here. But other than that, yeah. So what has worked over the past year? The webinars have worked. I will say that. I've had, like I said, up to 16 people, and I get lots of people viewing it on YouTube. and interacting. And I think people have reacted really well to the microprocessor stuff. Also, I've had some really popular guests on. Ali G was very popular, Alicia Gilpin, possibly because she is a woman entrepreneur systems integrator, which is a little bit rare, right? Let's see, Carlos Colon, he was one of my early folks. Let's see who else is here. Participants. We got Jeff Chandler on. Oh, cool. Yeah, Jeff mentioned that he was going to possibly log in here. Jeff was a student of mine back, I think, years ago, maybe 4 years ago or something. I did a class up in the Cincinnati area, and he was in the class. And Jeff, I think, works for a big technical company, but is now starting to do some things on the side and thinking of starting his own endeavors, maybe doing systems integration for people. So that's cool to see him here. Jeff, anything you want to say? Say hello.
Well, just that I really appreciate your webinars, and you kind of you captured me in that class. You know, I was very intrigued by your experience and your past, and I wanted to learn more. And so that's why I've been staying in touch, because even back then I had aspirations of going on my own. And that's why, you know, I appreciate what you said in that text to me about taking it easy, you know, going in methodically and, you know, taking advice. And so that's what I've been doing. I've been taking advice from some of your guest speakers on certain things. And, you know, so things are starting to happen, Mel. I figured they would eventually, you know, if I plugged myself enough and, you know, did some cold calls, which are a little uncomfortable, but if you know the resources and you've got phone numbers, by all means, why not do that, right? And eventually somebody will call you, and that's what happened. I mean, I got a call about a week ago about 3 different jobs to go look at. So from one customer. So I'm like, wow, okay, that sounds good. So I keep my day job, you know, I'm going to keep that. And I still have a family to support and medical insurance to maintain for them. But in the meantime, you know, I'm going to try to pursue what I love to do, which is, you know, automation and just industrial comms, and now IoT. You know, I'm learning more about the information of things. So yeah, it's always something interesting. It's always a learning experience. And and I want to be a resource someday to, like you, to those who might be looking for some information or some training.
What's your main platform, would you say? Is it Allen Bradley or Siemens or something else?
Allen Bradley. Allen Bradley. That's why I went to your course, because I need to know more about Siemens and S7 platforms. But Allen Bradley is my bread and butter right now.
Yeah, I estimate it's 70% of the U.S. market. I don't have firm figures. There was a point at which they were even higher than that. I think Siemens at the time was 5%. They may be even higher now. But I would say if you do Allen Bradley and Siemens and maybe pick up a little Omron, you're going to cover most of the spectrum. Yeah.
So I'm interested, you know, and it seems like lately I've been getting more requests for IoT, you know, like remote accessing for smaller companies, obviously, but it just seems like that's the niche, right? That's the thing that people are looking for. Business owners are looking for that, you know, being more efficient with their support and troubleshooting. You know, up in the Northwoods of Wisconsin, there's a lot of open area. So some things are out in the middle of nowhere. And to come up with a solution for people like that is going to be key.
Yeah. And so Phil and I had a whole webinar kind of on this. Phil went down to Miami with me, and we got to talk quite a bit on the way down there and in the plant. And one of the things that I mentioned to him is, you know, in retrospect, if I didn't have to use the existing infrastructure of this plant, if I could have just stuck my own sensors on the machines without using things like point IO and dealing with the regular PLCs in there, wouldn't it have been nice if I could have done production counts with just my own sensors, right? And so Phil came up with something, and we did he's mentioned this in a couple webinars, where he has a remote sensor. It's actually a garage door opener in his case, and he can put it on a line and it transmits using cellular technology. And so, right, as long as you have cell phone coverage, in the North Woods of Wisconsin, one of the problems is going to be you may not have cell phone coverage or internet coverage, right? You don't have either one. So how are you going to relay that? You've got to have something, a big transmitter or something.
Yeah, and I actually ran into somebody at church last Sunday that knows a guy that is involved in radio, and I don't know what kind of radio frequency we're talking about here, but radio communications for equipment that might be out in the middle of nowhere. And so I'm going to try and meet up with this guy next Sunday and see if I can tap into his knowledge and see what he's doing and what he's done it on. I think I've heard him say he did it on oil rigs and things like that. So that might be a little, I don't know if that would work up in Wisconsin, but I want to make sure I have every angle covered, like you said, cellular, internet Ethernet, or radio. I mean,
yep.
Whatever the customer needs to get communication or get visibility to their equipment. I want to be able to give them all these options, and say, well, these are all the ways you can do that. And
yep.
Which one would you like to do, So, yeah.
So that seems to be a big topic. We've done some IIoT things, especially over the last part of this previous year. And I think that's going to be a topic that's going to come up a lot in the next year. Early on, it's funny because when I started this website, I thought, oh, PLC programming, that's what everybody wants. But then I looked around and I thought, well, there's 20 other people selling PLC programming, and they've all niched down into their thing, like Stephen Gates, right? He's a young guy who has created specifically PLC programming classes on the Allen Bradley platform for electricians, right? It's electricians that want to move up into the next step and become a confident PLC programmer. That's a great niche, and he owns that. I don't want to invade his niche, right? Vlad Romanov. Vlad has been a guest on my show here, and he focuses on corporate clients. So he sells PLC classes, primarily Allen Bradley, again, to a company, and then they license his videos, and they, I don't know, buy it for a year or whatever. And he's got a pretty good niche going. So I don't want to invade those, but one of the members here at the Automation Academy, Seb and Matthew, who he is yet to show up on any of these webinars, but he was a big influencer, and he's actually been a member the whole time, paid his dues, and doesn't even show up a lot of times these things. But he said, I want to support you in this. And honestly, I'm not here for PLC classes. He said, I deal with PLCs, but I want to learn more about systems integration in general. And now, added to the systems integration, I would say the Industry 4.0 and the microprocessors. Phil's been a huge resource for microprocessors because he's been dealing with stuff like this ESP32 little devices. He got into the cellular. How do I make this thing transmit over a cell network? And also started talking about, I think it was LoRaWAN and some of the other communication protocols. So who knows, Phil may even come up with some ideas for you on the radio transmitter part. Now, there's going to be issues with that, right? You've got to power things. That's one thing. So you got a big battery pack or whatever out in the middle of the woods somewhere. I don't know if you can put something out in the middle of the woods that lasts for a year that is powerful enough. Well, there's solar, right? You can always use solar charging. You could use, I suppose, wind. I don't know. but a lot of these alternative energy solutions may be ways to power some of this stuff. But it's obviously got to justify itself. It's got to be an important enough thing that people are willing to put, I don't know, a $3,000 item out in the middle of the woods somewhere to monitor something, right? Trail cams are a great case in point. People use the trail cams, but gee, wouldn't it be nice if you could monitor them in real time, right? And see what was going on in some of these remote places. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And they have these cell cams now that operate on cellular accounts. So, I just picked one up this weekend. So I'm going to try it out, because there's a place up north that I'm going to be doing some testing, which has a very poor cellular signal. So there are amplifiers out there, boosters, if you will, that you can get. But again, now we're talking dollars and cents. I mean, is it worth it to the customer to do these things? So, yeah. I mean, hunters, it's worth it to them to buy these top of the line cameras and put them out there and pay whatever they pay for their cellular service, So I'm going to be doing a little experimenting up there here and there. And then you get in touch with this other guy about radio transmissions and things like that. Just so that I can have that in my portfolio, that is an option.
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of it is educating myself on what is out there. Like I did a search for that car wash, and I found a company out of California that does an Opto 22, and it's some kind of a switch that you would connect to the internet, and they have some software to go along with it. And their big thing is security, so that you have not a firewall, but a two-part credential, logins and things like that. You just don't want anybody tapping into your equipment and, possibly making changes or, causing harm. So security has become a really big issue now with this IIoT business.
Right. I think
it's got to be secure.
One of my next guests is going to be a cybersecurity person, right? I'm gonna definitely do that because it links up with. So Mike O'Day has been a guest here, and what he's done, he has the same issue. He has upwards of 2,000 trash compactors scattered around the country. And same thing, he cannot use things like, even though they're in malls and things like that, he can't use the mall's Wi-Fi network. So he has to use the cellular service. And that's one of his concerns. So he mentioned his little device, which is from Soracom, and he worked out an individual licensing thing with them. They're a Japanese startup, but their little dongle, it looks like a USB stick, plugs into a USB port, and you have to have an antenna for it, obviously. But it will, piggyback onto the cell towers, and security is a big part of what he does. So, he used Node-RED to program his, and some of what he's doing is proprietary, but he was on here and mentioned a lot of what he's doing. So I feel okay at advertising a little what he was doing. And then of course, Phil, I think Phil was on that webinar too. And so part of one of the things that's happening is we're talking to people like Jerry Wassinger from PiePlates, who develops devices that mate with Raspberry Pis, which opened up other doors to investigate other devices that I think Phil posted something called Balena Fin last time. That was something that interfaces with the Compute 4 module. So there's little nuggets of wisdom in here that people provide that are like, oh wow, you can use this device and plug it into this device and put it out in the middle of nowhere. And by the way, here's a cheap way to piggyback onto the cell phones. And I never thought about what happens if I've got this thing that's always connected to the cell network. What does that cost, right? Well, that's not good, right? So we need to use something like Node-RED that only broadcasts when it needs to, right? That only operates on event or whatever, and is not just constantly transmitting, which has been one of the problems with OPC UA, is that you're constantly monitoring stuff, and you need stuff that just works periodically. Yeah.
On a trigger or some sort of thing,
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Automation Direct offers something too, and I have yet to read into that more. It's what's it called? Stress something links. Anyway, it's a switch, that you'd put on the Ethernet IP, and then you'd set it up. But I don't know how their security protocol works. I don't know, if that's going to really be beneficial for this application. So yeah, I'm still in the R&D right now with this. I obviously, you asked me if the car wash had a PLC, and according to the owner, it does. So I have to go out there and look at it, or have him send me some pictures so I know what he's got going on out there. And I asked him how old it was. He said it was around 10 years old. So, we'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see where that goes.
I Googled, as soon as you contacted me last night, I just Googled remote PLC, and I found a site called Remote PLC, and it came across as pretty spammy. I don't know if you found them, but it did mention, though, all the platforms. It had, Omron and Allen Bradley and Siemens and all these different things. And it mentioned also that you don't need a VPN with it, which I thought was kind of nice, and that it was sort of independent of the IP addresses and all that kind of stuff. It came across, though, as, I don't know, very cookie intensive, and it kind of warned me that, hey, man, you go to this site and give your information, it's not secure, and who knows?
You want to give your customer a good feeling, though, that this is a secure device, because I know the question is going to come up.
Absolutely.
Is this secure? I mean, is there a potential for hacking, or is there a potential, for something to go wrong? Obviously there always is, but you want to do the best you can to give them the most secure device that you can. So yeah, again, you go out there, you can type in whatever you want, and boom, there it is. You read up on it, and you're like, ooh, I don't know. So that's why I reached out to you. I'm like, oh, have you ever heard of anybody wanting to do this before? And what did they use? What did they find successful? Because obviously people have used things and didn't work out for one reason or another. And so, just trying to get some advice.
Yeah, Automation Direct popped up. I found a lot of things that are directly, Allen Bradley or Siemens related, but they were all very expensive, and that's been the problem. And they're more or less, they're for plants, right? And when you get into ControlLogix and things like that, just the people that even owning ControlLogix software is just out of the reach of so many people. You can't afford the licensing every year, or you got to pay, $3,500 for a package up front, and then you've got to pay a yearly update fee. And a lot of individual people aren't going to, certainly not a hunter. He's not going to want to buy something like that to keep up with it. So,
right.
Yeah.
So,
which is where Phil comes in, right? He's been dealing with a lot of this stuff. Node-RED, is free. Raspberry Pis are less than $100. And that's a full computer, right? It's running on a Linux system, and it has all kinds of things. It has, spreadsheet it's installed on it if you want to collect information, save things. But we talked a lot in one of the previous webinars about, is it rugged enough for being outdoors? Actually, in the cold, it may be. In the heat, maybe not so much. You got to figure out a way to cool it. But in a cold place, I think you could probably generate enough heat, right, just through its own use, that it would work pretty well. So the cost of those things, but immediately when you get into industrial, if you get into Opto 22, you mentioned, PLC Next, we did a webinar on that. The minimum prices for those platforms, not counting software, not counting anything else, is about $800. And you're not, at that point, you're not even into a power supply or an enclosure or anything. Just the intelligent device itself at 24 volts, it seems like you jump out of the $100 price range and into the $800 price range. And there doesn't seem to be anything in the $300, to $400 price range.
Right. Not yet anyway.
Not yet anyway. That's right.
Yeah.
So even the compute module is a lot more rugged. I think it's still, maybe 24 volts. It may be 24 volts. And that may be in the $100 to $200 range. Phil, do you know that? Do you know the cost of a compute?
Sorry, I was on mute. When it kind of comes to, it's important to kind of define what the intelligent device is. Is this device going to be actively used for control? So if you're remote and you're trying to send commands to tell the machine to stop operation or continue operation, that's kind of a different level than just a read-only mode where you're just sending diagnostic information about the status. And so that's kind of where two different kind of levels of reliability and kind of security come into play, because you're not as concerned if a hacker can just necessarily read what your machine is doing, opposed to taking control and actively changing parameters or forcing it to do something that could damage someone or something. So I think that's the first step. Frank mentioned kind of the PLC Next, and that's a full-on PLC that you can remote into and make changes to remotely, which can be very helpful for some applications. But a lot of times people are just looking for, hey, is my machine working? Is there an error code? What's the error? Is this something that someone can just go and unplug and plug back in? Or is it something where we need to have a technician go out and fix, an arm or some type of system that's completely failed? And that can really help you kind of evaluate what you need to go. How much firepower do you need to bring? Do you need the full work truck, or can you just show up and, unplug it? And so that's where a lot of these smaller devices can come in handy, is just providing more information about the status of the machine. When it kind of comes to the different devices that are described, the Raspberry Pi is just a little Linux computer. So it's got a full operating system. It can do anything that, most Linux computers, that you think of off the shelf can kind of do. So what that means is, how do you put that into an industrial environment? And there's a lot of industrial computers that are available on Advantech or some of the automation websites that they're off the shelf. They're $200, $300. And the only difference is, they're in a little case, whereas a Raspberry Pi is open. It's out on a circuit board or a printed circuit board with some headers that you can plug into. That doesn't mean that the little industrial computers from, I'll have to double check, but I'm thinking Advantech or Automation Direct. One of those websites has, I'm pretty sure it's Advantech, has just more industrial computers than you can sort through. But most of them are little Linux boxes that you can interact with. And so the most important thing is just, how do you network with these? How do you interact with these? Not necessarily, or are there plug and play modules that you can just plug a PLC direct into it, or sensors or IO directly into it, just trying to get some type of signal. It all depends on kind of what you're looking for. If you're just looking for if the machine is on or off, you don't have to plug a PLC into your little computer next to it. You can just run a CT clamp to the power. Say, okay, this machine is drawing power, it's not. There's all sorts of creative ways to kind of tell what the machine is doing that don't necessarily involve purchasing a $2,000 internet connected PLC. And oftentimes that's just what people are looking for. So that's kind of what I wanted to emphasize, is there's different levels. There's really, really cheap microcontrollers with just one function. There's internet connected devices for fleets where you could have 10,000 internet connected devices, and you try and manage all of these and keep them all up to date based on the changing requirements. So there's technology companies and systems that do exactly that. And then there's also, full-fledged PLCs with little Linux computers built into them, like the Opto22 edge device that you were describing. And that's overkill for a lot of applications. Doesn't mean it's not a good product. It just might be kind of overkill for just trying to monitor 1 or 2 points.
Yeah. So Jeff, one of the things he mentioned that I guess came to my mind is that a PLC probably couldn't do is if you're doing something like a trail cam and you're out in the middle of nowhere and you want pictures, you want maybe streaming video, or maybe you just want pictures of what's going on in the area triggered by an event, or maybe you want to trigger the pictures at certain times yourself and say, I want to record now or whatever. That's a lot more data to try to transmit. That's one thing. And then 2, it's not just on-off signals. It's quantities of, information that you're sending. Right. And somebody may have an incentive to want to tap into that. I watch a lot of those Alaska shows, and I think about those trappers out there, and their trapper lines are probably, where they are and what information is available there is probably really important to them, and they don't want a competing interest, right, hacking into their system and grabbing that. So I guess that's where the security part may come in.
Yeah, it makes sense what Phil had mentioned about the capability. What does the customer really want? Do they want to be able to remotely control something, or are they just looking for read only? And that's huge, because that's going to make or break the cost incentive. I mean, if you go into the point where you want to control something like hit a reset button remotely, if that's all they want to do, I don't necessarily know that I'd want to have them or allow someone to be able to do that, especially like a car wash, because there's a lot of things you need to take into consideration before you push that reset button. So I don't know if I would recommend, I don't believe I would like to have that capability, because if somebody was in there and I hit reset and some other engineering component failed or you bypass it, we don't want to go there. So I think he really wants to see at the end of the day, the temperature, like so an analog signal. He wants to see maybe a list of alarms or warnings that may have come up, and maybe some cycle, data, just things like that. So read only, I think, is more what he's looking for, because I'm not going to mention, we can do a reset button. And if we do that, there's all these other things you need to consider, before going there, from a safety standpoint,
a lot of what Phil's working on, he kind of the thing he showed during the last webinar, the little remote, just a photo eye kind of thing. And we were talking about scattering them around where each unit could transmit to a central location, and you didn't have to wire anything, right? That you could just, for instance, on a car wash, you probably have a central cabinet, so you could just tap into all the points in the central cabinet. But if you had something like what I was dealing with in Miami, you have this line, and there are various machines you have to tap into, and they're all different platforms. You have GE and you have Siemens, you have Allen Bradley, and to try to pick up all those points in any one of that PLC, it involved a lot of wiring and power issues and all kinds of things to hang these remote things. And so what Phil came up with was just a battery operated single unit that could monitor a single point, out in space somewhere, which was kind of neat. Yeah.
Right. And set it up to your component or your receiver. You deal with the IO, how you want to deal with it, and then go from there. And it's more or less information anyway, right? You're not, are you sending feedback to the integration or to the equipment that you're monitoring or not? Or are you just sending a message to an operator saying, okay, this is what's going on, this isn't happening. Then you let them decide what to do. I mean, it gets into that too,
Yeah. What our thing was I needed OEE information, and I'd been waiting 6 months for people to wire things in, and we wanted to know, how many boxes has the palletizer put out? How many boxes have passed on this conveyor at this point? How many cycles has the box fillers, engaged? And they were all different platforms, and it was kind of like if I had 20 sensors and I could just hang them, and they were discrete. because I can get tons of information on that discrete stuff and then just log it to a central location. And when you're done, 3 months are up, I can present that data to the customer and say, this is your last 3 months of data. I can tell you which machines were down, how long they were down, how long it took operators to fix things. And hey, we're done with that study. Now, do you want the permanent version? Right. Which will cost you a little more, and we'll have to wire things in and we'll make permanent. But meanwhile, go on to the next customer, and hang the same devices on the next customer's, things and do his.
Just give them a taste. And if they like what they see, and if they see that it's value add, then come in and integrate into their current systems. Makes sense.
Yeah. Especially on the low end. I think there are people out there. We both Phil and I have watched this guy Walker Reynolds, who's really working on massive, industry 4.0 solutions for people, and that's great if you have, I don't know, 100,000, 500,000, $1 million to spend in your plant. But some people are just wanting the entry level stuff, right? Mm-hmm. They just want to see, if I knew a little more about my line, can I prove that I can save, a little bit of money knowing more about my system,
right?
And then go implement the big picture thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you probably, your new client base might be more in the lines of the TPM or the Lean Six Sigma guys, those guys that have projects that, like you said, you mentioned OEE. So that's a term used in the TPM and Six Sigma. So you might have a lot more of those guys coming at you and saying, hey, I want that data. Can you get it to me? And how much is it going to cost? They're not going to want to spend a lot of money, like you said. So you guys have a little bit of a niche there. You got something going and it worked. That might be a huge product line for you and you guys. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So one of the groups I've been working with is the manufacturing extension for Tennessee. And I know Phil has one down there in Georgia that's the same thing, but you work directly with it's like universities reaching out to local companies and saying, how can we help you? Right. So they don't have a lot of money to spend, and they honestly don't charge a lot of their customers. They're funded by the US government or the state government or the school systems. And then they say, well, how can we help you in your manufacturing efforts? Right. So some of these low cost things are things that they can get their feet wet without having to implement these, big expensive systems. Yeah.
Nice.
So over the next year, I just got involved with them, and I've been on one plant visit. I have 2 more starting early this next year. And we just go in and visit and say, where could we help you? And so far it's been a lot of, putting in cobots and things like that. Well, collaborative robots are expensive. I mean, and you still have all the safety stuff you got to put in around it. So I'm really hoping to get in with more of the IIoT, kind of solutions with some of these companies. Yeah.
Right. And like I said, they're all looking for a way to streamline and to cut their dollar, because with inflation, there's a lot of reasons, but yeah, want to get a low cost solution. That's good info.
Yep. So hopefully over the next year, actually even a few months, we'll do things like cybersecurity, a cybersecurity webinar. I want to get somebody in that really knows a lot about that and can answer some questions there. And of course, more Phil and talking about his devices. The thing he did with the ESP30, I don't know if it was the ESP32, it was a different ESP, but it was a little chip. And he embedded that in a garage door opener, and actually carried it to the cellular networks. And I'm interested to see what that turns into. It's kind of evolved.
ESP32.
Yeah, it was actually called an ESP8266, and it's this little chip right here. It's just a little power supply thing. And you can get these for less than $1 from China. So. But this one's Wi-Fi, so it's almost like a throwaway Wi-Fi sensor. That one's not going to connect to the cellular network unless you spend a lot of money on top of that, so that's not worth it. This is a cool little device. It's called a particle board. It's a company based out of Pennsylvania. And one of the things with all of this cool latest and greatest technology is you have to kind of think about what are the startups using to build these? Because it's usually not the startups developing all of the intellectual property or kind of the hardware, software. Most of the time they're using some type of other product and then kind of repackaging it. Now, these guys repackaged it very well, so that's why people like using these boards. There's no SIM card in this. It's a cellular module. You plug it in and it works. You know, it goes straight to the little app on your phone that they provide, and there's no subscription fee. It's pretty impressive. They're selling these for about $60. And this is actually what's in that garage door sensor now. So the price went up a tiny bit, but the convenience also went up. But the particle board's pretty cool. They're actually using, I'm pretty sure, don't quote me on it, but I'm pretty sure they're using some Amazon Web Services technologies to manage the fleets of their devices. But yeah, there's a lot of really interesting projects open source projects that people are using with these microcontroller devices to bring them online and manage them.
Interesting.
I think the cost, right? You know, we talk about jumping from $1 to $60 or $10 to $60. But by the time you add any labor in this country, you're at hundreds and hundreds of dollars anyway, right? Unless you're mass producing things and just sending them out and getting them made somewhere else. But implementing things is what costs the money here, you know.
Yeah, the device you were describing earlier, the garage door opener, it's actually in a box ready to send out. So that's why I don't have it to demo today.
Okay, cool. So are you sending up here?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
You don't have to send your address publicly.
Sure. So one of the things that I thought about doing with it is I could put something in here, maybe link to this Siemens back here that randomly sends you some signals. And then we can compare the randomness, you know, whatever I have here as a record of what was triggered and for how long. And then you can compare it and we can get, you know, comparative time hacks. How long did it really take for you to get the information on your end? How far does our time hack differ, right? I don't know how we'll coordinate.
What's the latency?
Exactly. Well, because you know, as traffic goes up on cellular networks and things, how much delay really is there? Most people don't care, you know, if you're just talking or whatever. I guess you would notice it if you were talking, but yeah. So anyway, Phil and I have kind of been known each other for about 1.5 years now, and took a trip together and things. I got to visit him down there, and we went to Miami, and so we've kind of been getting more involved on some of these IoT type things. I've got 5 Raspberry Pis here now, and I've got a ton of Arduino stuff. I haven't done anything with it, but I'm hoping to, you know, get some. I want to put an autonomous robot crawling around on my floor doing different things here. That's one of my goals. I've got all the parts for it. It's just a matter of putting something together that runs around here and explores.
That's part of the problem, is getting these parts. Because after I saw your Raspberry Pi, you did a little video demo on that. I went on to try to find one, and they were back ordered out like 6-8 months. I'm like, wow. And a lot of electronics are that way. I mean, even in Automation Direct, you notice there's back ordered. Allen Bradley, Rockwell's all back ordered out, you know, certain components. So yeah, that's one of the problems we're running into now, is not being able to get this stuff, you know.
Is there anything in particular, Phil, that you think is more available than others that is worth adopting? Maybe, for instance, if it's made here in the US, it would be more available in the US.
Oh gosh, that's an interesting question. I guess I kind of categorize the different devices into 2 categories. There's the microcontroller devices. So things like Arduino is kind of the entry level. You know, they're using microcontroller chips on those devices. Those are going to be much more challenging for most people to kind of interact with. Then there's also the Raspberry Pi or the single board Linux computers. And there's a lot of single board Linux computers that are not Raspberry Pis specifically, that offer the very similar kind of environment for developing on. So just any single board Linux computer might be a good place to start.
Okay.
And then but the headers and the things to interact with other devices, there's still going to be individual pins or?
Yeah, typically there's kind of the GPIO pin header. It's kind of, well, let's see if we have an example. There's a Raspberry Pi behind me somewhere.
Of course, they don't interface like with Pi plates, which is a really cool thing that he's developed. But he mentioned Balena fin, which is a.
So like this is just kind of like, this is a PoE header or a hat. They call them hats or shields. They're just a printed circuit board with some stuff on it. And this one interacts with the Raspberry Pi with this GPIO header. So there's 40 pins and they're general purpose input-output pins. And so you just smack this on top of the single board computer pins, download the library and start running programs on it. Now they are Linux computers. So a lot of automation guys tend to be Windows only because a lot of the software ran on Windows. I'm not, that's something with the audience where you kind of have to check to see, hey, are you guys familiar with Linux computers and running things in a terminal and kind of playing around. The Raspberry Pi OS that is supported, they have a graphical user interface and they also have just the Linux box where you can type in commands. A lot of times there's the support for a lot of the graphical programs isn't really there. Node-RED is a popular one that's a graphical interface.
Well, even Scratch, right, which is for kids. I mean, kids pick up on it and stuff. But what I guess what I was wondering on the GPIO is the GPIO is going to be different for different platforms, right?
Yeah, well, the Pi plates, for instance, you'd have to double check, but I'm pretty sure it's just a 40-pin GPIO kind of header. And so the Balena fin that we mentioned earlier, that has a 40-pin GPIO header. Most of these single board computers have that 40-pin GPIO.
Same pin out or different?
Usually it's the same pin out to my knowledge.
Interesting. Okay.
And so that Raspberry Pi hat could also fit any other single board computer as long as it has that same 40-pin GPIO header.
Okay.
Yeah, we may have to investigate.
We'll have to check that out first before, but I'm pretty sure it would work.
I think, what was his name? Sean, there was a guy named Sean on here, Sean Terrell. And he was dealing a lot with those other platforms. There was something in particular that he was promoting, I think. He may be a good guy to have on, talk about some of the different platforms that he's used. He's a big IIoT guy on LinkedIn. So,
okay.
Yeah, you'll find a lot of a lot of people are trying to do some more like machine learning and AI stuff on these boards, and so you'll start to see a lot of specifications being put out on how much. There'll be something called like a TPU or like tensor processing units on these devices. So that's what the compute module for Raspberry Pi is. They're starting to add additional processing capabilities, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's able to interact with more devices compared to the older ones. So there, don't be afraid to get, the Raspberry Pi single board computer from 3 years ago. You don't necessarily need a compute module 4 to interact with temperature sensors or, various sensors that you might plug into this board.
I've got 2 4s and 3 3s, and they're almost the same. I mean, in most ways. So, and there's some really good exercises just online and putting stuff in there that, either goes, I mentioned one that goes and searches the U.S. Geological Survey's thing of earthquakes and in real time, and then, type the word panic if you see one over a 7.0 or whatever. But that could be a search for anything online, right? As long as you know what it is, it can update its own information from online resources and things to do searches. I mentioned that to my daughter, I guess. What was it? There was something in particular that she was talking about that it would be nice if she got updates for, and you could put something like that out there that would just do those updates, and you don't have to burden your existing laptop, and worry about whether you're packing it up and hauling it somewhere else, because this thing will constantly be online and, like I said, cost less than $100 and constantly monitoring something remotely, so yeah. I think we should probably do a lot more on things like IIoT next year and applications for things, and definitely open to, suggestions and comments on these for those of you who see this on YouTube later. I definitely appreciate you guys showing up today, because I would have just probably covered, more about the website and what things were without your input. So
awesome.
Let's see here.
I'm glad you didn't take the day off, Frank.
Well, I do these every 2 weeks, and I will continue over the next year, no matter what. That is my commitment, I guess, to doing this. And the topics are, again, pretty much open topic. I plan to do the next one January 14th and then January 28th. And actually, one of the things I wanted to bring up, show you a little bit of the behind the scenes again. This is a list of all the webinars that I've done. This is a list of all the files that I have. Let's see, where's the files? There we go. That's actually like downloadable software kind of things, where I put them on Amazon, my Vimeo things, final documents. We've got 100 and some odd of those. So I want to see, look at all the Raspberry Pi stuff. Microcontrollers versus PLCs, RPI basics, how many pages they are, and then where I put them. So on the site, there's a lot of places to download this. Jeff, I'll send you a login, and you can go check the site out and join in. And it's actually got a place where you can leave messages for each other. It's got a kind of a social media site, if you want to call it that. But the other thing I was going to show you is how I do my calendars. This is kind of a crazy thing, but it's just evolved. I started a calendar in 2012 in Excel, right? And I can go all the way back. I didn't use things like Outlook or whatever, but I can go all the way back even to the classes that probably the one that you were at, Jeff, see 2014, 2015. Everything is yellow. In yellow is days that I had booked for whatever. You can see a lot of them were automation training a long time ago. And then as I get to the newer stuff, after my tornado, right, there's ABD. This was probably the trip I did with Phil. No, maybe not.
Yeah, it was right after that tornado that just destroyed your training center.
That's right.
I think, where did we go, to Bowling Green or something? Or
to what now?
Wasn't it in Bowling Green or Kentucky?
Yeah, well, that was the last one, right? Mine was in Lebanon, but Bowling Green also got a tornado. Mayfield, Kentucky, and Bowling Green. That was more recent.
Right. Yeah, but that's where that's where you had your training. That's where it got moved to, I should say. I thought.
Oh, yeah. Yep. So anyway, this is how I book things, and you notice it says web. Right. So this is today's webinar, next webinar, next webinar. So I book them ahead of time every 2 weeks, and then sometimes move them. Like if I've got to be somewhere, I'm going to be in Washington State here. So I don't know that I can do, well, it looks like that's an off week. So that's good. See, I'd be traveling that day, so I would have to reschedule it. So this is how I do my scheduling. It's kind of funny. It's just been an Excel spreadsheet for a long time, and it's evolved into other things. I keep my income and expenses and my right when I sell books and how much I make from different books and things. I just keep all this stuff on here.
You got to keep the track of it anyway for Uncle Sam, right?
I do. Yeah. So that's actually what I do for my preliminary taxes. And I turn over that first sheet to my accountant every year. And that's
Yep.
how I kind of keep my records. There's fancier stuff, there's QuickBooks, there's whatever, but I've never, this has evolved and it works. So
you got the raw data and let your accountant crunch the numbers,
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Give him the raw data and he's got the rest of it.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up here. Thanks everybody for showing up, and hope to see you next time.